All right, welcome back to the next lesson. So in this one, I wanted to cover something called inversions, okay? And inversions are actually super important for two reasons, which we'll talk about in just a second. But first of all, let me cover what an inversion is. So an inversion of a chord is when you basically take the chord and rearrange it so it's not in its standard root position. All right. So actually, let me define what root position is first of all. So root position is basically a chord with the root on the bottom. It's pretty self-explanatory because if you imagine the roots of a tree, the roots are always on the bottom. So when you say root position, when you have a chord like C major, for example, the C major chord, C, E, G, C is the root. Okay? An inversion is essentially when that C is no longer on the bottom and it is, either on the top or it could be in the middle. It could be like that, or it could be G, C, E like that. As long as the root is in a different location other than the bottom, this is called an inversion. Okay? So let me just write underneath this inversion. A chord with the root in the middle or the top, basically. So in any position that's not the bottom. Okay. Now, why would this be useful? Well, first of all, the way that it sounds, an inversion, is it sounds less stable than a root position. So if I just play a regular C major chord, you see how stable this sounds, right? For example, let's take this C now and let's move the C up an octave to the upper C. So now let's keep the other two notes the same, the E and the G, but we'll move the C up. And this is what this sounds like. So this is still a C major chord or a C major triad, but it does sound a little bit different. It sounds like maybe the chord is a little more uplifting or it's slightly more unstable, right? So this is called first inversion. When you take the chord in root position and here, let me tilt the camera down a little bit here. When you take the chord in root position and move the bottom note up the octave, this is called first inversion. Inverting something is obviously when you turn it upside down or turn it inside out. So, you're turning the chord inside out. This is first inversion. Okay. If we do it again and put the E on the top this time, this is called second inversion. Okay. So now the root note, or C, is now in the middle of the chord. And if I do one more time, move the G to the top, we're back in root position. Because now you can see the C is back on the bottom. Does that make sense? So, you basically have root position, you have first inversion, and you have second inversion. This is when you have 3-note triads, so chords that have 3 notes. If you have 4 notes, for example, then you'll actually have first inversion, second inversion, third inversion, and then you have root position again. But for a regular triad, you'll just have, root, first, and second inversions. Now, why are inversions important? For 2 reasons that I think about it. Number one is it makes the music just sound different. It gives music some life and spice. So this is mainly for a textural reason. It lifts things up, it changes things up. It doesn't always feel like a stable chord when we have inversions. I hope that makes sense. So, it's still a C major chord, however, it's just rearranged so that the root is in a different location. So now the root is not stabilizing the chord anymore at the bottom. It's actually in a different position. Okay? The second reason is for voice leading. And voice leading is basically when you, transition between one chord to another, you want to keep the voices smooth. So smoothly going from one chord chord to another. All right, so let's try an example. All right, let's just choose a progression here. Let's do one. Let me think here. 1, 4, 5. Yeah, let's just do 1, 4, 5, back to 1. Okay. So what we could do if we just have regular 1, 4, 5, 1 is this. You know what? I'll just do it with one hand here. So I'll use my left hand, but watch this. So we have 1, 4, 5, 1. You know, this is all in root position, all of these chords. But you'll notice when I go from the 1 to the 4, I'm basically moving my hand up a fourth for all the notes, right? So my hand actually has to move each time I play the chord. And that's actually not ideal in classical music, which basically expanded to, you know, pop music and all that. We're trying to keep the voices as smooth as possible. So what we can do is after the first chord, the C major chord, we can actually turn the F chord around a little bit so that it actually your hand doesn't have to move as much. So instead of going to the root position of F major, I could just lower the C an octave. Remember how before we mentioned that C major and F major both share a C in it, right? So why don't we just leave the C on the bottom and change the upper two notes of the C major chord to F and A. And now we have F major second inversion. So it's so much smoother now for me to go from my root position C major to go to the 4 chord without having to move my hand all the way up here. So I can go from 1 to 4. This is called second inversion. And now instead of going from 4 all the way up to 5, why don't I just go to G major second inversion, right? This is still G major, but I'm moving the D to the bottom, so now it's second inversion. And then finally, I can go up to first inversion for the C chord again, or the 1. So I could go from here to here. Now this works because the B, which is the leading note of the C major scale, or the 7th note, really wants to resolve up to C. Okay? Now the G in the 5 chord really wants to stay where it is, because if it doesn't have to move, then it won't, right? So the B will rise up to C. The G will stay where it is because the C major chord has a G in it anyway. So C major and G major both share that G note. So it just stays there. So from here, the G will stay. And then the D on the bottom can either go down to the C, so you can go this, or the D can go up to the E, right? Now the reason why you might not want to do this is because now you're missing the 3rd of the C major chord, and that E really gives us that major sound, right? So you can always add in another voice if you wanted to. Okay. So just listen to how this sounds if I add in the left hand. So first I'll basically just do octaves in the left hand to show you what this sounds like. So right? Now, if I add in, let's see here. See, the bottom is just going C, C, B, C, which I'm not really moving much at all, right? So now that 5 chord, the G chord, is not as stable because we're actually doing the first inversion of the G chord instead of actually having the G as the root. You know what I mean? Now we could always start on the first inversion of the C chord. We could do it like this. Well, here, then go to the root position of F major. And then go to root position of G major, and then back to first inversion of C major. You could do that. You know, as long as your chord progression allows your hand not to move too much and basically stay where it is. You could also go like this. So the last chord is still C major, but I'm going from root position of 5 to the 1 chord, but keeping the G where it is, and the D, which is the 2nd of the scale, can rise up to the 3rd, and the leading note can rise up to the tonic. right? So that naturally works there as well. So I mentioned before in the previous video, one of my favorite chord progressions is 1, 6, or 1, 1, 6, 4, and 5. 1, 1, 6, 4, 5. So if I just did 1, 1, 4, 5, it would sound like this. Right? But watch this. Now I'm going to do 1 and then 1, 6. 1, 6 is basically first inversion. That's what that means. First, so the 6, the small 6, is a symbol for the first inversion of that one chord. And where am I playing that inversion? I'm basically doing it in my left hand. If I take away my right hand, I'm just doing this. So root position, repositioning, so the E is now on the bottom, and I keep the C on the top, and then 4 to 5. Look how easy it is for me to move from my first inversion chord up to the 4 chord. It's literally right there, you know? So it's almost like I treat the first inversion chord as a transition chord between the 1 and the 4. But that inversion gives me that uplifting feeling, like I'm taking a step towards something else. At the same time, I'm maintaining that happy open quality of that one chord. So that's why inversions are so useful, because it really allows us to open new sonic worlds, you know, instead of just, you know, I guess you could say restricting ourselves to root position chords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know, you can actually throw in these inversions now and then to create some extra spice, right? So let's try another progression here. Let's say we have 1, 2, 6, 5. So 1, 2, 6, 5. Let's try 1. So instead of going, so actually you can see in the right hand I'm playing inversions, right? The note I'm playing on the top actually becomes the note that the listener hears the most. You know? Because if I didn't do that, if I didn't start with this chord and I just did the root position, then it would just sound like this with G on the top. Which isn't very interesting. So instead of just doing, I can actually switch around which notes I want on the top. So basically I'm doing first inversion of the 1 chord, then I'm doing first inversion of the 2 chord, which is D minor, then root position of the 6 chord, A minor, and then back to G major. And the melody, it very smoothly goes from E, F, E, D, gets that, you know, you go up a little bit and then come back down. Very, very comfortable. So an exercise you can do is come up with your own chord progressions, and then once you do that, try to, when you go from one chord to the next one, try not to change the voices. Try not to have them jump around too much, you know? So if you're going from C major to G major, instead of going from C up to G, consider going from C to the second inversion of G major. So this way, this is already better than just going from here to here, because the G is just going up to the B, the E is going up to the G, and the C is going up to the D. What would be even closer though is if you go from the root position to the first inversion of the 5 chord, because now these 2 notes only need to move down 1 note, right? So again, less is more. All right, that's a good exercise. So come up with your own progressions and find out some appropriate places to put some inversions. If you find that you're moving your hand a lot, if you're playing guitar or keys, try to find those inversions that will help us, you know, not have to move very much at all. Okay, it's kind of like good practice when we're playing. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, and yeah, experiment with inversions. See how they change up your music and the different emotions that you can draw out from them as well. Sometimes inversions make us feel uplifting. Sometimes they make us feel more triumphant. You know, root position makes us feel very stable and steady. So these different inversions can definitely spice up your music. All right. So hopefully that helps. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll go into the next video of creating our own chord progressions. Okay, see you then. Bye-bye.